Here we are.
Welcome.
Yeah. So lead us, Mr. Kelly.
All right. I wanted to get out there first and say if you guys haven't listened to Evan's recording, it's a really good one. And then also the slides that go along with it. And I was just telling Evan this is they're freaking amazing. So even if you're just learning networking, this is a really good place to start because there's some really good information here. And then Evan, I wanted to ask, so I saw at least one. How many places are there where you would set aside that we're going to answer a question with during the class? I saw one when I was going through it. I didn't see any others that jumped out at me, like in a red box. Are there
I
more than that?
lost, no, I don't know, man. I lost
Okay.
track. It was, uh, first of all, I suck at time management. So, it was trying to get my deck done. And then I even told my wife, I'm like, all right, in a couple hours and going to go record this thing. And, yeah, man, it was like 9:30 at night and I clicked record. I started going, and then our Wistia instance has a limit of 4 hours on a recording. And so I was just sitting there talking, then all of a sudden this thing pops up and says you have 1 minute left. I'm like, what? 1 minute for what? And I look and I'm like, holy crap, it's been 4 hours. So yeah, I feel bad that I think when we revise this in the next cohort, because this is the first time we're doing it in this manner. In the next cohort, we'll break this 4.5 hour long video into segments to make it a little more digestible. But I lost track of where I was putting questions. So I know one of them was subnetting, maybe.
Yeah,
I don't
the one that I
remember.
saw was subnetting.
All right.
So, and then also I do want to point out, so the way that you laid it out here with information in the way that, say, for instance, red areas like pros and cons and such, is really laid out very nicely, and there's a nice flair to it. So, um,
Thank you.
with that, I will say if anybody in chat, in the YouTube chat, has any questions regarding the networking piece, please get them out there so that we can start knocking those off, or really anything at this point in time. As we do that, and as people start asking questions, so I wanted to ask Evan if you wanted to give just a little bit of background of how you got into networking, and then what made it stick with you. Like, what's the go-to for you? Like, why do you keep going back to it? Why do you love it so much?
I don't know. Everything just fits together so nicely. I think it's probably the same reason why developers like coding, and hardware people like hardware. Everything, it's just layers. Everything fits nicely on top of each other. Everything makes sense when it's working well together. The more you understand the fundamentals of networking, the easier it is, to troubleshoot things, to optimize things. So it's one of those things. And when I started it, actually the very first thing I did with networking was, man, it would have been like early 90s. Everybody was using modems, including myself. Everything was dial up. That's how and there was no internet. So you're dialing into bulletin board servers, other people's systems, things like that. And everybody was, in the hacking community was different back then a little bit. I think it was very close knit. And I think 9,600 or 18.8, bits per second, 18,800 bits per second was, my speed. And I wanted to show off for my friends. So I built a board that would multiplex two modem connections. But I didn't have two phone lines. So I ran a cable at night, late at night. I ran a cable across my yard into my neighbor's and tapped into my neighbor's phone line. So I was using his phone line and our phone line. And so I was getting double the speed of everybody else. And it wasn't long after that, there was a company called WebRamp that came out with a product for that. But that was the first kind of networking thing. And it was, and then in the 90s, I mean, if you had a CCNA, CCNP, CCIE, those are all Cisco certifications. If you had those, I mean, they were paying me $120,000 a year. And this was, mid 90s. And I was getting paid $500 a class to teach. So, I mean, it was awesome. So I was teaching CCNP, which back then you needed 4 tests to get your CCNP. It was, you had CCNA, you had routing and switching. Gosh, I can't even remember anymore. Remote access was one. I mean, there were 4 exams, and that's all you needed to get your CCNP to go take your CCIE. The CCIE would be part, exam and part practical. So at that time, you had to fly out to San Jose, and
So I got a
you had
question for you,
2 days.
Evan.
You had one day to build the lab and second day to troubleshoot it.
What has changed over the last, well, you've been doing this for a long time. So let's just say 20, 30 years. Where do you see things new and different to keep things exciting in the world of networking and cybersecurity?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, it's the same. I mean, fundamentally, nothing's really changed. I mean, TCP/IP is still TCP/IP. We build
So if I
additional
have an old
protocols
book, I can
typically.
still learn from that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another reason why, it makes it, when you focus on the fundamentals and the basics, those things don't change. Same thing with information security. You tack things on, like the biggest things that have changed in networking over the years are mostly at the application layer, where you've got new exciting applications and protocols at that layer. But, ARP is still ARP, fiber is still fiber. I think how we use fiber has changed a little bit. We're starting to use, different wavelengths in that fiber, but yeah, it's basically the same.
So IPv6 has been around. It's new, right? Because it's the latest version of IP.
Mm-hmm.
Just kidding.
No, it's not new. It's 2000.
You're
We
right.
came out with that. So 25 years ago.
So why are we still using IPv4?
Hex.
Ah, hexadecimal for those who don't know.
Yeah. Nobody, everybody's uncomfortable, looking at a hex address. I mean, 192.168.154. I mean, anybody can, that's easier, but yeah, the way we do addressing in IP version 6 is, I think, intimidating for a lot of people.
We just need to change the English language to speak in hex.
Yeah. Or, I mean, you could layer on top a translator, I think, to make it easier for people. But also I mean, when RFC 1918 really changed everything, that was when we introduced private IP addressing and network address translation. Then it really took away the big motivator to go into IP version 6.
You mean the scare? We've run out of IP addresses on the internet. It's the end of the world as we know it.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
it was
Well, and
not.
if you look at like who owns class, if you can, like all IP addresses, IANA, Internet Association of Network Addressing or whatever, they are the ones who divvy out the public IP addresses, right? The registrar of those things. And so in the United States, and there's a European one, there's a Asian one, AppNIC, and I don't remember what the European one is, but they, if you look at all the public IP addresses and who they're assigned to in the United States, I mean, you can tell that there was very little planning that actually went into that. I mean, Ford Motor Company owns like 4 Class A's. Like, why the hell do they need 4, Class A networks, publicly routable Class A networks? So if you still have one of those, they're worth a lot of money.
And that's probably why they bought them. They realized the good investment in the day.
Yeah. Department of Defense has like 23 of them, 24 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. But that's all public if you want to go look at that. It's kind of interesting. That's another thing that I think has always been really cool about networking is there's just so many really fun things you can do with networks.
So what tools have you, sorry, got it.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
What tools have you used to learn networking? I mean, you can't just read it in a book. What have you done hands-on? And what should our learners do hands-on to really dive into networking?
Yeah, I mean, start with your command line, right? I mean, Microsoft, I'm on a Mac right now, Mac, Linux, they all have a bunch of tools that you can use to see what's going on with your network, ipconfig, ifconfig to see your configuration, netstat to see your current, network connections that you have, on your computer. That's always really interesting. And when you track that stuff down, like, who is my computer actually talking to right now? You'll be surprised. If you've never done it before, you'll be surprised that it's talking to a lot more places than you think it is. Like, you're going to like www.amazon.com and you're like, oh, it's just me and Amazon. No, there's like 50, 30, I don't know, other connections that are taking place on that same website that you typed in, because you've got ads, you've got marketing stuff, you've got trackers, you've got cookie. I mean, it's just all kinds of stuff going on. So I'd start
Just
with
a,
command line.
yeah, exactly. And by the way, ifconfig has been depreciated. Finally,
Mm.
Windows is combining with Linux, after
Oh,
40 years.
ipconfig
So
is being deprecated?
no, it's now just ipconfig.
No, Linux is
So
ifconfig.
are they? Okay. Did I
Yeah,
get them
flipped around.
backwards?
Yep.
Okay. So go to a command line, folks, and practice. Type. I have to use a command line to remember. My brain doesn't remember. My fingers
Yeah,
do.
ipconfig,
ipconfig. Yep.
netstat's another really fun one to use. You can check,
NSLOOKUP or dig.
yeah, who is, I mean, there's
Yep.
just a lot of tools. I mean, some of those you won't become native to your operating system. You may have to download something, and then go deeper, right? Get yourself a copy of Wireshark. It's free. It's open source. Start capturing packets, and you'll be like, wow, what is all this stuff going on? And track that stuff down. You'll see the flags set. You'll see the headers. You'll be able to see everything. And then, using tools like, 'cause those are the tools that I still use every day, really, not every
Mhm.
day, weekly for sure. And then Nmap was always I love Nmap, still love Nmap, use it all the time. And that's been
Oldie but
around
a
since
goodie.
what, 96?
Yeah. Yep. And also has their list of sec tools, so the different security tools to include different Wi-Fi tools. What can folks do in their home to maybe learn more about networking and say separate IoT from their regular use? So when IoT is compromised, then it doesn't affect the rest of their home.
That's why I tell people that, you get a lot of people, because for some reason people think it's really sexy to be a pen tester. I mean, everybody wants to be a pen tester. And it's like, and I'm almost gotten to the point where, like, we don't really need any more pen testers. I mean, maybe, but we need people who can speak English, you can speak other languages. What I'm saying is, like, communicate in a way that people can understand. So I said English just because that's what I speak, but Spanish, Swahili, whatever language you speak, be able to communicate what you found, right? And the thing about, if you just focus on penetration testing, this is one of the things I love about the CISSP, is it helps me put information security into context. The worst risk decisions you're ever going to make are the ones out of context. So if you just know networking and you're just a master at networking, but you don't understand anything else, that's where you should stay. You shouldn't be making recommendations on what the company should do with information security and risk outside of what your purview, right? So with pen testing, you get a lot of people that want to get into pen testing, and I'm like, start with hacking yourself. That's where I started. I hack my own stuff. So on my own home network, TCP/IP is still TCP/IP. I have things on my network. The average American, I think, today has 11 to 13 devices or things connected to their network.
That's it?
Average.
Sorry.
Well, you got some that have none, probably, and some that
Right.
have, but do your own asset inventory. We preach all the time to, our customers, you need to conduct an asset inventory. It's hard to protect the things you don't understand or things you don't know you have. That's a fundamental. Do the same thing at home, right? So start, do a ping scan or do an Nmap or, whatever tool you want to use, but start hacking yourself and then identifying, because you're going to see things reporting back and like, it didn't identify as, it just said something I don't understand, right? Because a lot of times, like, if you just use Nmap, I mentioned in the class, that OUID, that's part of the MAC address. So when you do a ping scan, it's going to try whatever system you're using or whatever. It's going to try to identify the manufacturer of that network interface card based on that OUI for a default, right? You can do other flags and things, but so it's going to come back to something like, I've never seen this, but I don't know what the hell this is, right? It doesn't say my satellite dish. It doesn't say, because that's not the manufacturer of the network interface card that your satellite provider used, right? So you have to go through this curiosity thing and start digging in and find out what's going on and find out why it has these open ports and what's accessible. I mean, you find a plethora. I mean, I've done this so many times. I use my own home network as a lab all the time because I'm not going to get in trouble if I crash it.
You just have to
And
be
I should
careful with your ISP. I've had mine who have gotten mad at me in the past.
But if
So
I'm
just be
staying on my home
aware.
network, if I'm staying on my like
Yeah.
192.168,
Yeah.
I'm never going to hit my ISP.
Yeah.
And then if you break stuff, the best way to learn things is to break it and put it back together again. So don't worry about breaking it. If your wife is mad, she's not going to be able to watch Netflix tonight. That just puts more pressure on you. If you've ever been in an incident response before,
There you go.
that's like your wife wanting to watch Netflix, over your shoulder. What's going on? When's it going to be fixed? Da, da, da. That's what it's like in real life too. So it's crazy how many parallels there are between your home network and the enterprise network. It's just more complex on the enterprise. You find a hell of a lot more services, a hell of a lot more things, but the basics, the fundamentals, the things that you can establish a base from and then build upon, you can do it at home.
I'm seeing great comments in chat about using VirtualBox, Hyper-V, VMs. Just, build your own home or just buy, you can get cheap routers and switches and unplug from your ISP and start practicing and breaking things, as
Yeah.
Evan said.
That's something that's cool about
DOS
networking
yourself,
too, is
yeah.
if you're curious, because that is the hacker mentality, really is, curiosity. It's this,
Mhm.
like there's never enough to know, right? So you just keep digging and going sideways and whatever. So yeah, no better place to do that than right in your own backyard.
And we don't recommend, I saw it in chat, someone practicing in a hotel. I've heard that story. Someone was taking a class, week-long class, learning about DNS spoofing, so they decided to try it out at their hotel. And they realized how well it works because hotels usually don't have very good security. And they basically had their PC routing everyone through the hotel. So,
Yeah. No, I mean, my dad used to always say shitty choices have consequences. So, go ahead and hack the hotel if you're willing to deal with the consequences. It's going to be, it's illegal. It's certainly unethical. Yeah, be careful.
well, then you have to deal with the hotel IT staff or just regular hotel staff. And you don't want to go there. So
No,
good way to
no,
learn.
absolutely not. But that's the fun thing about, that's why I've always loved networking. It's just, there's so many fun things you can do with that. And if you want to start going after wireless networks,
Mhm.
Aircrack, NG, Kismet. There's just so many fun tools to do there. You can build your own stuff.
Mhm.
The possibilities are endless. I never run out of things to monkey with.
So I want to switch and ask about DNS. So who do you use for your DNS? Do you just use your ISP or do you use something like Cloudflare? What is it? There's 1.1.1.1,
Hmm.
8.8.8.8, 9.9.9.9.9. Anyone you
Yeah.
recommend?
Yeah, I go with 1.1.1.1.
Okay. I forget
Yeah.
who
And
owns
as
each one.
as a secondary, typically like 8. I don't like anything my ISP does in any ISP I've ever used.
Right.
I'm actually
Yes.
surprised how good it is here in Mexico. We have fiber to the house, which is surprising because we're rural here. We're 8 kilometers south of Puerto Vallarta, and we have fiber. And
Hmm.
I love fiber because it's synchronous. So I get the same up down and it's solid. Um, they run it above line. Run it above ground everywhere here,
Hmm.
which is kind of interesting. Whereas in the U.S. they typically bury it.
True. True. Let's see. Clean browsing has a DNS. There's 1.1.1.1, which is Cloudflare.
I was gonna say
Google.
1.1 is Cloudflare.
Google's 88888 or 8888 and I'll
Yeah, those
switch
are the two
mine
that I
every
use,
once in a while.
1111 and 8888, the two that I use.
Quad 9. And I like to switch
Mhm.
it. So can they see where I'm going? They can't see what I'm doing, but could my DNS server, whoever I'm leveraging as my authoritative DNS, could they see where I'm going?
No, they can just see the names you're resolving. So assuming you're
Right.
going to the same places of the names you're resolving, then maybe, but no, there's no traffic routed through them. It's just the name resolution.
But even that, then they can see my name resolution.
Sure.
So
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is on the internet, I mean, most of us aren't doing anything that's interesting enough to give a shit. Excuse me, sorry my language, but because I get that a lot. There's a lot of security people that are, really
right.
paranoid, and they go through all these steps of trying to hide this and hide that. It's like, why?
No one cares. Hide in plain sight. Exactly. So do you use,
Yeah, no one cares. That's totally true.
yeah, even the FBI. I mean, you have to give them a reason to
Right.
care about you. How about a VPN? Is that still a thing? Should we be using VPN on open Wi-Fi at hotels and airports?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it depends. Like, it depends on who you are and what you're doing. I felt weird telling my mom because my mom was asking about what VPN should I use a VPN and what VPN should I use? And I told her, don't worry about it. Just do what you're going to do, because the complexity we're going to add to your system and make sure you're doing this and doing that, you're just going to end up causing yourself more headaches at the end of the day. The things that you're probably doing, like you logged into your bank and, somebody was, there was a man in the middle, rogue AP, whatever. Regulation E in the United States, you get all your money back. So yeah, it'll be an inconvenience, but I don't know. You got to understand what a VPN is and what it does and what kind of work you're going to be doing. Um, if you used it, great. If you didn't, great. I mean, that's kind of my take. You just see so many breaches nowadays, and most of those are not happening because of somebody man in the middle at Starbucks. I mean,
right. That's not the account takeover attack vector. No,
no,
agreed.
and it's just probably some high school kid, messing around with things and doesn't know what to do with the data anyway. And, I mean, it's not worth my time mostly.
Well, now with zero trust network access and SASE, it's not as required because hopefully whoever you're using for your SaaS, your cloud-based application should already have security built in at all of the layers. So tying this
Yeah.
back
One
to
thing I would
zero trust.
definitely do is turn off auto join,
Mhm.
so turn off auto join on the Mac. If you go to, Wi-Fi, you'll see your auto join hotspot
Yep.
down there, settings,
Yep.
Wi-Fi, turn that off.
Yep.
Because
What is it? Pineapple
that's the,
Wi-Fi could be used. Anyway,
oh yeah, you can set up any, I mean, because that's the only thing it's using for authentication is just the Wi-Fi or just the SSID. So if it sees another SSID that is the same name as the one you've got set to auto join, it's just going to join that. And that's that's just easy to turn that off.
what do you think about hiding SSIDs? Should we hide our SSID anymore? That used to be a
It's,
thing back in the day.
no, not in my opinion. It's not worth the time.
Hmm.
I mean, it's more of a headache than anything else because anybody who's going to be going after your Wi-Fi is going to find your SSID anyway.
Right. That's
So
true. And
it's
if you're using a well-known brand here in the United States, it's easy to find SSIDs because they set them all. Not the
yeah,
same, but very similar, and then use the same password scheme for them. And even though they've been alerted the risk associated with this, yes.
yeah. Like on your home network, use the for your SSID. Use your neighbor's address as the SSID and see if the neighbor notices. Like, what?
Yep.
Play around, do funny things like that, maybe. But that's the
Think
thing. I
back.
mean, an SSID. I mean, any attack on a Wi-Fi network is going to be. You have to be in proximity, so your attacker has to be here, right? So if you've got
Yeah.
the risk is threats and vulnerabilities, right? So if you have threats like right here, then and you think it's worth your time, then go ahead. But where I live, there are no threats to that. There's no close proximity. There's nobody here that's going to know what to do with it anyway.
Do you recommend folks set either allow lists or deny lists, formerly known as white or black lists, with their home network, whether it's based on MAC address or certificates?
I do like that. Yeah. Because I'm a firewall purist, right? And one of my biggest peeves in this industry is people who maintain firewalls. You're an expert on firewall management, or you call yourself an expert on firewall management, and your egress filtering is shit.
Mm-hmm.
Because the basic fundamentals, firewall, the first function of a firewall is to delineate a less trusted network from a more trusted network. Inbound ingress and outbound egress. So if you're only doing the inbound, the egress, and forgetting about the egress, your job's not, you're like half done. And if people maintained egress, because the reason why people don't do it is because it's work. I get it. Because you're going to have to track down, okay, what's this traffic flow? What's this traffic? What's this traffic? What's this traffic? And, does it need it? Whatever. It takes time. But once you do it, then the benefits are huge, right? There's so many networks where I've, went in and closed egress. Again, it's time, because you have to do a lot of root cause analysis on where this traffic's coming from, where it's going, and whether it's authorized or not. But if you're ever going to do zero trust, you ain't going to do it without doing what I'm talking about right now. It's a basic fundamental piece. And this is like a huge return on your investment, because when you lock down egress, you kill command and control.
Mm-hmm.
Not everywhere, not all the time, but your basic fundamental command and control. I can't tell you how many, no, I can't tell you. It's probably been 5 or 6 times that I've worked on firewalls, locked down egress, and found that there was already an attack in place. And because the command and control was still trying to get out to talk, but it couldn't anymore.
Would you say that having an inventory of what needs to be able to get out of the network would be a good step in setting up that egress traffic restrictions?
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, you definitely have to. But like, why would my domain controller ever need to connect outbound on SMTP or FTP or RDP? Or, it probably doesn't need to connect with anything on
And
the
if you don't
external
know what the
network.
letters Evan just said, take a second, look them up. Anyway, please continue.
Yeah, but there's so much opportunity for people to, work networks the way they're supposed to be worked. I've, being an old timer, I'm almost feeling like that guy that's, the old guy, get off my lawn, the old grumpy guy, because like you see so many people using technology today completely irresponsible.
Well, it's
You don't
the
plug
basics.
something in without understanding how it works.
I keep running into organizations that still use RDP, remote desktop protocol, to attach to Windows systems on the inside. And the FBI said, don't do that 5 years ago, at least, if not more. So
TCP
again,
port
yeah,
3389.
yeah. No, for those who are learning, you do need to know some TCP ports. You just got to memorize them. Universal hacking port, port 80, the secure universal hacking port, 443, and it's not secure. It just means it's an encrypted tunnel with validated. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's, yeah.
And I'm a huge
No way.
fan of like the OSI model.
Oh,
I
yeah.
love the OSI model because it today, all these years later, it still fits.
Yep.
It's conceptual. So, it's not hard coded into things but yeah, it still very much works today. Helps you understand,
Mhm.
how networks function.
And going back to Wireshark, you can actually watch the OSI layers in
Mm-hmm.
Wireshark and watch a TCP/IP three-way handshake. So for those who struggle with it, may not be network folks like Evan, yeah, play around with Wireshark as we recommend. You will need to potentially go to some unencrypted websites, HTTP, to be able to see inside the packets, which is actually harder today to find a straight HTTP website, but they still exist. But Just
Yeah, a
do it
lot of
to
times
observe.
yeah, a lot of times people leave port 80 open just to redirect to,
Right.
HTTPS.
Yep.
So when people don't type HTTPS,
Yeah.
your browser will default typically to, well, I think so, to HTTP and then switch when it gets redirected. But you could check that, with Wireshark for sure.
So how should folks, I'm slowly flipping through the books, coming up with questions that if I were a student 25 years ago learning this, so all of this class stuff for IP addresses is confusing to me. Is there an easy way to learn about IP address classes?
Oh, the classes like
Yeah.
ABC on a classical
Yeah.
network.
Yep.
I always think the easiest way is, I mean, you will just memorize the numbers, right? 0 to 126 is A. The reason why it's not 127 is that's reserved for loopback. Can't be 128 because when you go to binary, the way it's set up is the first bit has to be a 0. And so in binary, if the first bit is 0, that's a max of 127, right? And I put it kind of in that in the lesson, the bit values, right? Because each octet, you have 32 bits broken up into 4 segments, which are each called an octet, 8 bits. And so, and everything's in binary. So the first or last bit, depending on your perspective, way to the right, that bit value is a 1. The next one's a 2, 4, 8, 6, all the way to 128 on the far left. So a class A network, that first bit value has to be a 0. So if you add up, 64, 32, 16, 8, 4, 2, 1, you come up with 127. 127 is already reserved, so that leaves you with 126. So a class A is 0 to 126 in that first octet. And then you just keep working through it from there. Class B is 0, 0, 1, 0, whatever. So yeah, classful, but nothing's classful anymore. So, you're cool with that. So CIDR, which is classless interdomain routing, came about a little bit before private IP addressing. That was RFC 1918. The other RFC was like 1518, 1519 or something like that. That was the classless stuff, which then gave us the slash denotation. So before we used to say like on a class C, a 192.168.1.5, subnet mask 255, 255, 255, 0, which got like tiring to say. So now we say 192.168.1.5/24. So the first, and like I explained in the class, when you look at an IP address, part of that 32-bit space belongs to the network. It's a network address, and another part belongs to the host. And the delineation between what part belongs to the network and what part belongs to the host is the subnet mask. And so when a /24, that means 24 bits of that address are associated with the network. The last 8 bits are for hosts. So, that would be a 255, 255, 255, 0, right? Because 3 times 20 or 3 times 8, right? So the first 3 octets would all be part of the network. So if you did a /23, well, then that'd be weird, but that'd be a 255, 255, 254.0 subnet mask, right? And so if you really want to understand IP addressing, get really comfortable with it, learn the binary stuff. And then if you want to get into subnet masks and things like that, there's only one formula you have to remember, and that's 2 to the x minus 2. When I say 2 to the x minus 2, so let's say I need, 600 hosts, right? And what 2 to the x minus 2 will tell you is how many bits need to be assigned to the host value in that network host thing that I was talking about. I can't remember what number I said, say 600. So 2 to the x minus 2. So move the 2 over there. So then that becomes 598. So that x value on the top is how many bits need to be associated with the host address. So just do 2 times 2, 2 times 2. You keep figuring it out, right? And then you'll come up with how many bits need to be associated with that host value. So 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512. So 9 bits would need to go towards the host value. So that would give me that 255.254.0 subnet mask /23. That's the cool thing about IP addressing, and being able to subnet, in your head. Supernetting, just reverse it, go the other way. Same with networks, right? If you had, I have a class A, right? One big fat network with a whole bunch, 16 million hosts on that network, that's inefficient. It's hard on your routers. Subnet it according to what you need for each one of those hosts. That will take your routing tables rather than having to maintain a route or just flood the damn, because that would be one huge broadcast domain. We talked about in the class 2 collision domains and broadcast domains. So collision domain means that there's basically no filtering on the network at all. No filtering based on MAC address, nothing, right? It's like a hub. It means everything on that network contends for time on that network, right? And you'll hit a critical mass, especially how chatty, computers are today, where essentially the network will crash, right? There's not going to be anybody talking anymore because it's one huge collision domain and everybody's shouting at the same damn time and it's never going to work. So then you introduce switches, which then break up that big collision domain, right? And so what switches do is they keep track of which MAC addresses if it's learning. You can always manually enter these into the MAC address table, but it's learning which MAC addresses are on which ports, right? So it's only if it knows that this MAC address is on this port and that MAC address is on this port, if it's destined for that one, I'm not going to forward it out this one too. Right. So you start breaking up these collisions. So things will be you get more communications. You break up the collision domain. But you have still one big broadcast domain, right? So on a TCP IP network or anything that's going to be talking on the higher levels, which is basically everything, is still super inefficient. So you break up those broadcast domains with, typically with VLANs, right? Which is on the switch, you're just tagging ports that they belong to this VLAN. And you're telling the switch that do that same learning, but only on this VLAN. This VLAN doesn't talk to this VLAN. Switches can't do that. That brings us to layer 3, where you have to have a network aware device like a router that can switch, that can route traffic between VLANs. That's efficient. And so you break up the broadcast domain with routers. Because you'll probably need to know that for the test, I think. Collision domains layer 2, broadcast domains layer 3.
Know the difference between a router and a switch? Yes.
And a hub.
Yep. The gateway.
Repeaters.
Yep.
And we started using repeaters way back when because you were really limited on how far you could run, one network cable. One network cable, back then it was pretty much RG62 or RG58, which was coaxial cable. It goes longer than twisted pair, but there's a thing called attenuation. The longer it goes down, there's resistance. Resistance those represented. I'm getting weird now, but it's represented in ohms. It's represented in ohms.
That might be a little more in depth than you'll see on like a typical CISSP.
Sure.
But if you're going to be working, with networks, yes, because if you're wondering why things are not talking, connecting, working, it could be stretched too far.
Yeah, what were those devices? I haven't used it in a long time, but we used to use because we would measure resistance on network cables because you had to do it because there was so much variability in the manufacturing of cables. Then. So even though I had a Cat3 cable, and Cat3 is used, typically for POT systems, analog
plain
phone.
old telephone. Yep.
Yeah. You buy 2 cables and this one's working, but this one's not.
Yep. You'll still see that today. I've had
same length
network stop working and I realized it was the coaxial cable died. Took me forever to figure that out. And then finally just
same
out.
length. You're like, same manufacturer. It's like, why does this cable work and this one don't? And so you'd get out the, gosh, I can't remember the name of the device, but you'd find out, well, this one's got more resistance on this one, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, we had to do that weird stuff. But anyway, attenuation.
Yep.
The farther a signal goes, the weaker it gets,
Yep.
right? And so the way you would amplify that signal is a repeater. Sometimes people would call it an amplifier, basically the same thing. It layer one device that does nothing other than regenerate signals. That's all it does.
So
But
Steve
then-
mentioned in chat, remember the 100 ohm resistor cap at the end of a thin net run.
Oh yeah. Yep. I remember those falling off too. Yeah. So the repeater and then a hub is nothing more than a multi-port repeater.
Mhm.
It does nothing but take in the signal and regenerate it and push it back all the other ports again. I mean, that's all it does. And
One
then
thing I
on
want to
layer
caution,
2, you got the
if you don't
bridge
mind.
and a bridge, and the
Um,
switch is just a multi-port bridge. Sorry.
So you use the word port multiple ways. One at the network,
Right.
more,
Yeah.
and
True.
layer, is it 2 versus 3 or 3 versus 4? I think it's 3 versus 4. So it's just being aware, the context.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
found that
true.
out.
Like physical port, like where you plug
Right.
something into, versus the other port, which identifies the service. So when as the net in de-encapsulation, as it's going up the stack, TCP needs to know, all right, where do we hand this? Like what application is going to pick it up from here? And it uses, port assignments to do that. You've got the default ports. You can always change it in software, but that's when we're talking like port 80, port 443, port 21, port 23, port 22, on and on, 53. We talked about all those protocols already, right? 53 DNS, 23 Telnet, 22 SSH, 80 HTTP, 80, 443 HTTPS. Those are all common ports. But as it's getting de-encapsulated, by the receiving end, like say it's a web server. Oh, that goes to HTTP. All right, that goes to the web service. And then whatever you're using, whether you're using Apache or IIS, it's going to pick it up and do its work from there. But it has to, it's like addressing within the stack on what service is going to be listening to this. And the same way when it goes down, when it's encapsulating, you're going to have a destination port, right? So you're going to be requesting what on the other side, what service on the other side do I want to talk to? But I'm also going to tag it with my own source port, because my computer is going to have multiple connections that it's communicating with multiple things. And when it's going back up this, when I get a response back, because it's going to be between these ports, right? I need to keep track of, right, what communication was I doing here? Which browser tab, which whatever. So you always have source port, and that's what a packet filtering firewall does, right? That's the fundamentals of all firewalls, actually. It's just whether it's stateful or not stateful, what other things it's doing. But when we say packet filtering firewall, it's maintaining, or all its filtering rules are based on source port, source IP, destination port, destination IP, or destination IP, destination port. When you smack that all together, those 4 data components, we call it a socket. So that's a socket. And if you do netstat, netstat's a great place to look at that stuff. Just type up netstat -a, whatever flags you want to use with it. And you're going to see all that stuff. You're going to see all these sockets that are open. But that's what you're seeing. And that's how on one side, your computer's keeping track of who it's communicating with. On the other side, it's keeping track of the same thing. But it's got to keep track of these services. Hopefully that makes sense. But it's all really logical, right?
Well, that's exactly it. I have a few other questions for you since we have an expert in the room. So we're used to firewalls. They've been around forever. Now there's this thing, NGFW, Next Generation Firewall, which does IDS, IPS, WAF, all sorts of fun things. So what should we know about modern firewalls? If I'm working with a vendor, what should I be asking them?
That's a great question. I mean, I'm a purist still. So like I buy a firewall because I want firewall. I'll buy an IPS because I want an IPS. If you want to mash it into one chassis, meaning one physical thing or logical thing, it could be all done in software too, but chassis is what we call it. Like if I want everything in one chassis, I'm going to manage them as if they're separate things because they are separate functions within that same chassis. A firewall does firewalling. An intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention system does that. URL filtering does that. So DLP, data loss prevention, does that. So really, it's just, in my mind, they're different devices just smashed into one chassis. So treat them that way. You don't manage them all together. They need to be, I guess, somewhat synchronized. But my firewall does firewalling. Get your firewall correct. Your DLP does DLPing. Get that correct. Because I think people like, well, I just buy this one thing and plug it in and clickety click and everything's great.
Magically,
Well,
everything's secure.
No,
No, but that's
no,
what the
no,
vendor
no.
said.
Exactly. Nope. And that would be for me, I'm really big, and I think a lot of us should be on trust, credibility, and likability. If my vendor has to maintain those three things with me, right? Trust, credibility, and likability. So trust is you're not lying to me when you tell me that this thing does this thing. If it doesn't do this thing, that really sucks for our trust. Credibility is, being able to do what you say you're going to be able to do, keeping up with your service level agreements, support things, patching, all that stuff. If you say you're going to do it, then do it. And then the likability, just stop calling me and take me off all your damn marketing lists. That doesn't make it very likable. But I think the same thing with, vendors. Like you have to be skeptical. I was actually thinking about writing a series like, if I was just starting in this industry today, what would I do different than what I did when I came in this industry? And one of those things is I would be more skeptical, but less cynical. Because I've become cynical. I've become jaded over the years because you just see a lot of people taking advantage of other people, even within our industry. But you got to be skeptical.
Mm-hmm. Always ask why. Go beyond.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of subscription services and cloud or firewall as a service, as opposed to you doing it for yourself, particularly for small, medium businesses? I mean, I can't afford to hire an Evan Francine as my firewall person. So what do you think
Yeah, I
of
think
using those?
like anything, even if you had Evan Francine as your firewall administrator, you still need to test me.
Mm.
So you still need to test it, right? That's part of the method, right? So keeping up, if let's say it's a firewall, because if it's a small to mid-sized business, there's probably not a bunch of segmentation and internal,
Mm.
isolation between the networks. So you're probably talking about mostly management of a firewall between the office and the internet, and maybe some virtual firewalls if there's like something in Azure or whatever, right? But they're all pretty much going to be publicly accessible. So I think it would be, hire them, but then test it regularly, right? You can get out your own copy of Nmap, do some port scans, as just a basic place to start, or you could, map your attack surface on a regular basis. One of the tools I really like, it takes a little time to work, is REngine. It's open source. If you REngine, GitHub, you'll need to set up your own virtual private server somewhere. But it's a great tool to just keep on track of my attack surface.
So know what's on your network, know what people can see on your network. It's basically it with attack surface, protect surface. I
Yeah,
do want to.
yeah. And so if you're going to use a third party, use a third party, but test.
Yep.
Have somebody else either have another third party test them. Don't have your same third party test them. So, and it shouldn't be expensive. I mean,
No.
Geez, if you want me just to test if your firewall's working, I'll just start with a simple Nmap, and we're probably going to find something there, and it's going to cost you.
We can go through
nothing.
and knowing the different flags of Nmap. Granted,
Right.
may or may not be on the test, but just knowing some generic, like what's an Xmas tree scan, basically lights everything up. Yeah, how to do a ping very low and slow. You can set all of those flags.
Yeah, like that Christmas tree, like you said, when we talked about the three-way handshake for TCP, it's SYN, SYNAC, and ACPAC. right? So SYN, that means that those are flags within the TCP header. The SYN flag is on. So anytime your computer sends out something, if it's following the rules, right, that you could, that's what hacker, when you talk about Christmas tree, that is not in any rule, right? That means I turn on all the flags in the TCP header. And sometimes, especially legacy systems, you might crash them. Sometimes, I mean, you get unusual, sometimes of all kinds of unusual activity when you do things the way they're not supposed to be. But that's when we say SYN, that means the SYN flag is on.
Synchronize.
No other flags are on. And anytime you see that on a network, that's a request to communicate. Right. So if you see SYN flags like all over the network, like that's an indicator you probably have a SYN, either you have a half open attack, which is like, it's a denial of service attempt, meaning you're just going to send multiple SYN, but never send that act back at the end. So your computer's going to send all these SYN acts back and leave those ports open according to a timer. And eventually it'll waste all its resources. Now that's a legacy attack because all your common, regular operating systems nowadays will just roll those connections out, right? Rather than just keep them all open, waiting. But yeah, SYN flag on, and then your computer, if you're following the rules, would send a SYN and the acknowledgement flag, synchronized and acknowledgement flag, so both be turned on in that TCP header. And then your computer to finalize that communication would be that acknowledgement flag. When you talk about a Christmas tree attack, you've got all the flags on in that TCP header, which doesn't follow any RFC. That means you've also got the push flag on, you've got the urgent flag on, you've got, all of them are on. That's a Christmas tree attack because it's all lit up.
I'm looking this up.
Which flag do you think is like the green one? And which one's like the red one? I mean, for like Christmas. I really thought about that.
I'm just going to keep sending Finn.
Yeah, SYN flood. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you, Steve.
Yes.
So
go ahead.
So I wanted to hit on something. The question that you said that you'll answer during the live session is the one I pulled out. So it goes back to networking, which I know that was a couple minutes ago that we were talking about it. Do we want to hit that now or do we want to hit that later?
Yeah, anytime. I'm cool.
So
I don't remember
I'll
what it
hit you with
was.
it. So I've got it here. So hypothetical, our enterprise network has decided to use 172.160.0.0 network internally. In our network design, one network segment will require no more than 500 hosts on it. How should we subnet the network to enable this with the least amount of waste and the most amount of control?
Okay. So I didn't write that question well, first of all, because it's a 172.16.0.0. So that would be, I guess I'm just going to assume that that's a class B network because I didn't note anything about a slash in there. Did I? Did I do a /16?
You did not put a slash in, no.
All right. So we'll just say it's a 172.16/16. So a /16 means 16 bits. So in the 172.16.0.0 network, that means 16 bits are associated with the network and 16 bits are associated with the host. Right. So 2 times 2 times 2, 16 times gives you 65,386 or whatever the hell that number is. But I only need 500 on a network. Right. So rather than having one big class B like that, I need to segment that down so I can accommodate that 500, right? And assuming it's not gonna grow, so that means the bits that are associated with that host side need to accommodate the 500, but not unnecessarily anything more than that, right? So that 2 to the x minus 2 that I mentioned, how many of the x's, the bits, need to be associated with the host number, right? So if you just do it in your fingers, I do it with my fingers. So 1 bit would be 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512. Did I do that right? So 9 bits need to go to the host number, right? So I would subnet that with a slash 9 bits, a slash 23. I did do 32 minus 9. That was hard. So that would be the new subnet mask would be a /23. So 172.176.0.0. You can still do 0.0. That would be the first network. And then, yeah, that's what it'd be. Did I answer it? 255, 255, 253.0 would be your new subnet mask. And then if you want to know where the networks begin in that sort of subnet, 256 minus 253 is 3. So your first network would be 172.16.0.0. The next network would be 172.16.3.0. The next one would be 6.0. So what you did is you just created a whole bunch of networks that each can accommodate 500 hosts. 512. Actually 510. The reason why it's 510 and not 512 is because one address is going to be the network number itself. Now you can use it, shouldn't though. Just you know, why complicate it? So it's not 512 hosts on that network. It'd be actually 510, and that's the -2 piece that I was talking about. Because one's the network and one is the broadcast for that network. That makes sense.
So there's a question in chat. Test takers need to know how to subnet, and keep in mind it's multiple choice.
I don't know.
So for that, they'll be given, what is the number of hosts you'll need to accommodate with the network, and they might give you 510, 550, 1024, and 1,000,000. Can you at least determine the close answer for it? They're not going to really test your math, although you're free to use your fingers during the test. That is something that is completely allowed. So
I do them all
do
the time.
understand the basics.
That's how I subnet.
Mhm.
It used to be when I was, network admin all the time, you could subnet in your head, but now it's like I have to use fingers.
I'm trying to see if I can find it, but there was a chart that I used. Granted, this was for Microsoft certification. That was the numbers. It had the the amount of networks that you'd have and the amount of hosts in it, and it was a chart that they had. And my Google skills must not be good because I'm not finding the one I want. It's everything that I'm finding is more of like a Visio type outline for it, not like just a chart with numbers on it. So I'm going to keep looking for it though, because it's helped me in the past, and it might be a good visual representation for people to see, to get that idea of what we're looking for. So
Yeah.
Excuse me while I'm not doing something.
And if you want to learn how to do it with your fingers, right? It's just that one formula, 2 to the x minus 2. So 2 to the x minus 2 equals what? If you want to equal the number of hosts, fine. If you want to equal the number of networks, it works the same way. So if what I just did with that 172.16 was I needed it to be the number of hosts. So 2 to the x minus 2 equals 500. So 2 to the x minus 2 equals 498. 2 to the x equals 498 then. That x is how many bits? So 2, 4, 6, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512. That's the 9 bits. So those are going to be the bit boundaries. So you're never going to actually come up with the exact number 498. So you got to go to the one. If I need 500, well then 510 would accommodate that. If I went 1 bit more, well then I'm at 1022 hosts, right? 1024 minus the 2, 1022. That's too much. It's not the most efficient use of the address space, but it's always the 2 to the x minus 2.
And that's good to know. I mean,
yeah,
it's
if you
quick
take a class A and I need like 100 networks, and you want to segment a class A into 100 networks, 2 to the x minus 2 equals 100. 2 to the x equals 98. So this would be how many bits need to be associated with the network number now. So 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128. I would use 7 bits additional on that class A. So instead of my /8, it would be now /15. And then I would have that many networks.
So we do have in chat, awesome explanation, best I've heard yet. So,
Oh. How
because
about that?
it could be part of other questions. People are saying, well, I need to know how to subnet. And it could be included as part of a larger set of questions that we see. So, and yes, IRL, you'll need to know how to subnet. When you're working with your network engineer and you need to see if they know what they're talking about. Yeah, because they'll just throw any BS. They'll say, oh yeah, we have the network safe. Yeah, and they're just taking the easy way out because they didn't take the time to learn.
Right.
Let me ask you this, kind of a little bit of a tangent here, but it is mentioned in the book. Subnetting versus segmentation versus micro-segmentation versus VLANs. Oh my. Can
We
you
have
kind of
been, so as a purist, a segmentation is just taking the networks and breaking it down into smaller networks. And you would implement that at layer 2 with a switch, or you could put it router, right? I mean, you could segment it that way, but that would be inefficient. So to me, a VLAN is a segment, which is segmentation. Where people get confused is there's no filtering between those two network segments. So if I put a firewall between those two things, then it becomes isolation. So I use those two different words. In some people's terminology, they would still call that a segment. So I guess it depends on who you're talking to. But
I
that
often
was
have
central, by the way, that was central to, you remember the Target breach 2013 when I was consulting that thing? So it was in PCI DSS that you needed to have network segmentation. The intent of that in the documentation was isolation, but that's not what they said. They said segmentation. So this is one of the things that people do with compliance all the time. You do the bare minimum to be compliant, right? And so what Target had done was they were segmenting those networks between all the stores and back to the corporate network, right? And there was one video server in that corporate network that would collect videos from stores, right? And so in the attack sequence, when the attacker actually started on the extranet, right? Started in the vendor portal and blah, 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 eventually found themselves on this video server, right? And once you're in that video, I mean, this attackers just do what we would do. I mean, as network people, the attacker gets on the system, does a net stat, finds a whole bunch of damn connections, like to all these other, like, oh, this is the stores, right? And we use that as a pivot point into all the stores. And so in Target's defense, they call that, well, we are compliant because it was segmented. That wasn't the intent. That was the letter of the law, but that was not the intent of the law. The intent of the law was that you only have communication flows that actually need to be between those two systems. That would require isolation, which is put a firewall, some kind of packet filtering between those two. When we say packet, right, we talked about packet and segments. That's a layer 4 thing. That's a TCP, UDP thing. They didn't do that. But so it is really important. I guess the point is, depending on who you're communicating with, it's really important that you settle on the use of these two words. Don't just assume that everybody thinks that a segment is the same, or segmentation is the same as isolation. Different.
I do want to call out, so working a lot in PCI, that is a question that we do get very into with organizations. And I've had more than a few times sitting across from someone on the networking team. And when I say, what's your isolation look like? And they're like, oh, well, we have VLANs. And I say, okay, well, cool. You have VLANs, but is it isolated? They're like, yeah, they're VLANs. They're segmented. It's like, no.
And these
Is
are
it
network
isolated?
admins you're talking to, right?
What's that?
And these are network admins you're talking to?
Yes. Yeah. And then I'll go deeper and say, if I'm sitting on your network, whatever segment that you have, can I talk to the other one? And they go like, oh yeah, you can totally do that. It's like, okay, well then it's not isolated. And they,
Right.
I've had a lot of people very unhappy with me for pointing that out. And there's people that think it's isolated, or at least think that's in place.
Well, because you haven't added really, the only security you've added is maybe a little bit of obscurity. We have a saying that we've always used: obscurity is no security anyway. So from a security perspective, you really haven't done much, right? What you did was you broke up a broadcast domain. That's it. That just means, layer 2 traffic isn't going to go over into that network, but all the layer 3 stuff will if you're not doing any packet filtering. So it's, it's frustrating when people don't know the difference between those two. Ron, you have to leave? Dude, I like
It's
you.
been
You're
fun.
like one of my favorites.
I thought Brian and John were your favorites.
Well, they are too, but
Yeah.
you just bring like a light to the room. I'm telling you, Brian doesn't bring that.
No, I don't. I'm dark, as you can see from my sweatshirt and everything around me.
Can you say where you're traveling to? Any place cool, exciting? Mexico?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Washington, D.C. So,
Ooh.
yeah, going into the
Oy.
lion's den. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Make sure you
Thank you.
sanitize.
It's
Safe
okay.
travels.
Thank you very much. Good to see everyone, and I'm sure I'll see y'all next week.
Thank you
All right,
very
buddy,
much.
take care.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. So networks, they're awesome. Do them.
They are.
Hmm.
It's like you, that's one of the areas that I spent a lot of time in. And it's one of those things where it took me a while to really get a good idea of it. And like you said, using a lab, using your own equipment for this sort of thing is the way to go. I At least for me, I can't read something in a book related to networking and know it. I need to go in there and actually start doing it and and seeing what's going to happen, seeing how it works. Like you said, breaking something is a really good way to figure out how it works. I learned a lot by breaking stuff, and there was a long time that my wife actually wouldn't let me use her computer to fix it if she had an issue because she's like, you've said that you fix stuff by breaking it even worse as part of your job. I'm like, that's true, but at the same time, that's how you put it back together and figure things out because you know that if you're breaking stuff more, you know that you're making changes, and that can start isolating issues that way.
Yeah, I think people are generally afraid to break stuff. I mean, you have to break it in the right context, right? I'm not going to break a client's stuff, but I'll break my own stuff all day long. Especially the ones where I'm going to be the only one who's going to suffer, for breaking my own thing. Yeah, you learn. Trial and error is such a beautiful thing if you want to learn networks. I mean, that thing for people who are studying for the CISSP and want to be in any other part, there's thousands and thousands of different roles in information security that don't require you to be a network expert, right? So there's nothing wrong with that, right? So some people, but if you're interested, if you're curious about networks and you want to know more about networks and you've got kind of that curiosity about it, I mean, there really are no excuses for you to get on it. I mean, there's so many awesome tools to use. There's you started this like what got me into networks. It was just the curiosity. It was the challenge of trying to do things that at the time, I didn't know anybody else who had done it.
Yeah.
And it's past like the statute of limitations, but I stole a copy of Windows 95 from Microsoft in 94. That was another thing. It was just cool to brag about, right? I mean, that was the motivation. It's like, I'm running Windows 95. What? Shut up. It was buggy, but 28 floppies it took to install Windows
Wow.
95.
It's crazy to think that today, so 28 floppies was a lot then. That's nothing now in terms of what we use.
Well, now you just download and double click.
Yeah.
I mean, 28 floppies was like, put it in. All right, time for the next one. Put it in. It was so tedious.
Yep.
But I learned it was awesome to learn that stuff. I have learned things from breaking things in production. Taking down firewalls middle of the day because I didn't. That was a funny one. I mean, I had two PIX firewalls. These were 520s. which these were old, right? They were 4U. When I say a U, that's a unit. That's how much rack space it takes up. So we see the little bolt holes there, 4 of them, right? So it took up 4 U's. They were active passive, which is a failover. Have we talked about that in the class yet? Active passive. Okay. Active passive just means it's a failover. So if one fails, it just rolls over to the other one. So it's redundancy to some effect. But so I had these two, and I mean, they had the old ISA cards in them. You know, ISA went from ISA to EISA to PCI. I don't know what the cards are now, but so they were fat, but I loved them. They were super reliable, best firewalls probably I've ever used. Even today, they just did what I told them to do. But there was an update. There was a critical update in the PixOS for these things, and it's kind of the middle of the day. I was at Jask Software, which was super popular. This is .com days, right? I think I explained like why that was super popular, but it was consistently one of the top 10 busiest websites in the world because digital photography was just booming then, right? So I don't know how many connections there were on the network at the time, but I had the active passive and we tested the failovers on a regular basis. So I had a lot of confidence in it. And so I was like, this is a pretty critical, fault patch thing. I'm just going to deploy it, see what happens. And if it breaks, it's just going to fail over, and that'll be fine. But it was the wrong time and I didn't follow. That's not the process that I myself had established for the team, but I'm just going to go for it. So I rolled it in and crashed it. And I'm like, ooh, it didn't roll over either. Because there was something that got messed up in the heartbeat between the two systems for it to roll over to the other one. So the other one was crashed too. I'm like, well, what the hell? And I had no idea what was going on. I couldn't access them anymore. They were just bricked. So I had to get up, run into the server room, hook up a serial cable, right, to get to what the hell's going on. Well, it turns out that the new OS that Cisco had issued for these was larger than the flash memory I had on these firewalls. So it only written, 3/4 of an OS basically to them and then puked and crashed. So I learned a lot, definitely from that. And it was a really high pressure situation where I got, in a lot of trouble. But you look back at it now and it's like, I'm glad I went through that because it taught me a lot about dealing with incident response when everybody's freaking out. Taught me that I should follow a process. There's a reason why it's there. It seemed like a noble cause to deploy that patch at the time, but it was stupid. I paid for it. I kept my job, but
I have a similar instance where I wasn't the one that made the change, but we had Cisco as well, Pix, and we had one in the office that we were in, and then we had one in our data center. And my boss, he was making changes to the one at the data center, which is where we had our main servers were there at the office at the time. We had backups and such at the data center, backup servers for what we did. And he comes running into my office. He's like, you need to go to the data center now. And I'm like, why? And I think the data center was like 30 miles away. It wasn't super close, but not super far. It's like, why? What happened? And he's like, well, I was changing IP addresses and I think I might have fat fingered it and it's wrong. And so I can't get back into it now. And so basically he needed me to go down there so that I could reset the device or put in the proper information. And then he didn't want to go down there. But I got to go in there. I got to get in there and redo it with the correct information. But it's just like one of those things where while it didn't bring the operation down, if we had anything happen, that was the backup area of what we had. So and it's always fun going into a data center. I encourage anybody to get a chance to go to a data center. It's always interesting.
Dude, I've slept in data centers,
I've not had that
too many
opportunity.
times.
Luckily.
Slept behind the PBX. It was the warmest area in the data center. So snuggle up behind the PBX. Yeah, because that was, I think there were some advantages to, we talk about basics and fundamentals. There's definitely some advantages with being in the industry in those days, because a lot of things today we sort of take for granted. I try to get like new pen testers or new technical security folks that are looking for advice. I don't really call it the mentor thing. Maybe it is, but I tell them to try working 6 months without Google and without ChatGPT, without any search engine, because then you have to actually troubleshoot. It is a lot, it's a lot more work, but then you understand the functions behind everything. Because I think it's sort of easy now to just like, oh, I got this error message, so you just Google it, and then it tells you, well, just do this thing, and you do that thing, and it's done. And you didn't really learn anything. You didn't learn why it was that thing. You didn't come to the conclusion of that thing. And that's one of the joys of being in labs. So that would maybe be another piece of advice. If you really wanted to get deep in networking, deep in pen testing, deep in anything technical, do it without Google. Do it without ChatGPT, right? Or set up some rules. Like, before I ever use Google, I'm going to spend 3 days trying to figure out how this damn thing works myself, with my own tools, with my own mind, with my own scripts, whatever, and then go to Google, to just keep the ball rolling. Because then you can, it's so important. And I just don't think there's, we're kind of missing that a lot in this industry. Like, you can run, you can run all these tools and hack all these things, but do you actually know how that's working? Do you know why we use it in that way? Do you know what's happening behind the scenes? Do you know what I mean? There's a lot more stuff that's going on, because back in the day, you did have to write your own. There were no programs for it. You had to write your own scripts, your own programs. And it was definitely more pressure. Like, I took down a whole defense contractor one day because RAID was relatively new, at least in the commercial or in the private sector. This is a private sector that provided DoD stuff, right? And they had a RAID controller, and one of the drives was blinking red. Nobody really knew all that much about. I knew what RAID was, the book thing about it, and but I didn't know how. I never actually did it. It was so new, and so I'm like, well, let's order a new drive. Whenever I called the manufacturer, and the manufacturer, yeah, you need to order another drive, blah blah blah, follow these steps, and okay, so we get a new drive, and it was still running, right? It was a RAID 5, so that stripe with parity of the parity, whatever, it was still working. New drive came in, you drive out there to go, swap the drives, take the system down, throw the drive in, boot it up. It comes up to a BIOS message that it wasn't in the damn instructions. Ain't no Google. There was no Google then. So I'm like, what the hell is this? And so I called the manufacturer, like, we don't know. I'm like, well, that doesn't help. You know what I mean? Like, well, we can get an engineer. I'm like, right now we're down. I can't, because it won't boot. It's stuck here, and everybody's really mad. How long will it take a damn engineer to call? Well, it might be an hour or two. I'm like, these are the menu options. Which one do you think is the best one? I don't know, sir. I don't think I'm qualified to give you that. Like, all right, so you're like thinking through, like, okay, this one. Well, one of them was, and you look back at it now and you just laugh your ass off because it's so obvious. But back then it wasn't obvious. One of the options was initialize. If you know RAID and you know what initialize means in a RAID BIOS, it means you're wiping everything clean. To me, I thought it made perfectly logical sense that, yeah, I want to initialize this drive. I have no other option. Everybody's mad. Let's do it. Oh, shit. Now everything's gone. Yeah, that drive is now, the array is back, but there's no data. So that was restoring that from, oh my God, that was, but you learn so much from just, doing it. All the Microsoft stuff, man, I made so much money back in the day consulting, moving people from Novell to NT. And it was Microsoft actually made it pretty easy. There was a migration tool in NT
Really?
to suck it all in, and they just had to troubleshoot a few things.
I guess that makes sense that they would want you to use that because it makes it easier to move from Novell to NT. So it benefits Microsoft in that sense.
Microsoft is from those days. I don't, you know, people have their own opinions nowadays because you didn't start there. I started there, so that's why I'm jaded. So I understand my opinion might differ from yours for sure. But back in those days, Microsoft was ruthless, like ruthless. They would send limousines over to Novell's headquarters. And when the developers came out to go home, they would wine and dine them and bring them over to Microsoft. So in those days, you know, yeah, directory services, all that stuff was built by Novell engineers. It was pretty bad.
Interesting. I was not aware of that side
Oh
of it.
yeah, it's
So,
crazy stuff.
question in chat. So with current cloud systems are now more prevalent, where do you see data center techs in the near future with all these layoffs? So I want to just hit this one in terms of data center techs. I can't talk about the layoffs part. I don't know enough about it, but there's always going to be a place for data centers, whether it's going to be you're actually managing that data center or if it's somebody else doing it for you, really, which is all software as a service or cloud services are. It's just somebody else's data center or somebody else is managing that for you. So I think that there's maybe not, you're not going to see as many people like going like, oh yeah, we've got a data center at this point or a colo or whatever you want to call it, but you're still going to have a place for that, if not even more, as more AI or as more AI gets out there, there's going to be more need for computing power to power that AI. And then you need servers for that. It doesn't just all go somewhere and get processed. So if
Yeah, I
anything,
think
it's
instead of working for small to mid-sized businesses like maybe you were before, you know, some of the smaller ISPs or some of the smaller data centers, you know, you just get kind of gobbled up with the bigger ones, maybe. But I think, you know, I opinion is you're going to see things roll back a little bit to back into people's own data centers more because we become a little bit too. I mean, it's the same thing that happens, right? It's like a pendulum swing. It's happened so many times in tech over the years. Everybody rushes to the cloud, rush to the cloud, rush to the cloud, you know, and then you kind of become too dependent on the cloud, and then there's a critical outage, right? Like Microsoft West goes down. What the hell? We don't have email. People are addicted to their damn email. That's only going to happen so many times. Like, how do we solve for this? Well, you might have to get something on prem again, you know. So I think there's always going to be that give and take. So I don't think data centers, even the distributed ones that, you know, maybe people got laid off from, they're not, I think they'll light up again more in time. Yeah. Or, you know, learn some other skills too and keep those skills in your back pocket and just make yourself, you know, I think more valuable to people. You're more, what do you call that? What's that word when like, crap. I don't know. I can't think of the word, but it's a really important word. You make yourself more valuable in more ways. Because even if you were an expert on data center, which, you know, depending on what part of the data center, because you could break that out too. Like we're an HVAC guy, were you an installer, you know, power, all of it, physical security. I mean, there's just so many little pieces and components within the data center that you could have been a part of. But then, you know, you learn networking too, right? You just expand that perspective and make yourself more valuable in learning those other skills.
thank you.
Diverse. There you go. Jason Sparks, you just won yourself a brand new car.
Another one.
John's gonna get it for you, not me.
That's nice of you, John.
Yeah, he's a nice guy.
I got a view chart.
Um, another one. I don't think I've seen any specific cloud networking questions like VPC on AWS and stuff on the test question mark. So I haven't seen anything like that either. I don't know that they've quite gotten into that arena for the questions. So I wouldn't be surprised. There's going to be cloud information you need to know, but I don't know if you need to specifically get into cloud networking at this point in time for the exam.
No, I don't think so either. I think, cloud from the outside sort of stuff more than cloud on the inside. And even if it's cloud on the inside, it's going to be vendor agnostic stuff, I would assume. But that's a CISSP's always been. I mean, it's always really good at the basics and the fundamentals, but in terms of like cutting edge, like what's happening today kind of stuff, it's always going to be a few years behind, I think.
Let's see. Where do you see the future of AI and networking besides troubleshooting lookups?
AI and networking.
So I think AI agentic diagnostics are already being tested in carrier environments. So I can't speak to that one. I don't know much about how they're being used for networking. I'm not surprised because everybody's working on AI everything at this point in time. That at some point that you're going to have something where it's like, hey, AI, I want to, go into my network and program all this subnets and such and, make it all work. I wouldn't be surprised if they somehow do that at some point. How far
Right.
off, I don't know. Who specifically, I don't know. I know that the agentic where the AI is able to make decisions and do work is, like it said, being tested. I know that that's coming up now. Trying to hear a lot more about it. So it'll be interesting to see where that does actually start happening and who's going to take that dive and actually use it first.
Yeah. I mean, AI, the thing about AI, I mean, it's a tool. It's just another tool, right? And what's the functions that I can rely on as a tool? Like if I'm a tradesman and I'm a craftsman with a tool, what benefits would this tool provide me? And how do I use it the best way possible? So if you're going to use the tool, certainly learn how to use the tool, learn the pros and cons, behind the use of the tool. I use AI for a lot of tedious stuff that I don't want to do myself. Like if I'm coding and I'm, like troubleshooting something, like debugs, things like that. I mean, it's a lot of text, right? So I'll just AI, what do you see in this thing? And it'll point out some things. And then I can kind of go there and like discern for myself if that's the thing that I'm looking, you know what I mean? So I use AI for ideation. Sometimes I've been working on this one thing so long, I'm kind of not in the idea phase of life. So I'll just throw something at AI and it'll give me some ideas. Yeah, in terms of where it's going to go with networking, in my own networks, it's going to have to earn its way in. I don't just put it in because it does some sexy thing. I don't need sexy things on my network. I need my network to get packets from here to there in the best way, fastest way possible, securest way possible. And I'm already doing that. So it's like, all right, what's AI going to bring that I don't already have?
So one thing I will say about it is if you are using something like that, it's the recommendation is still going to stand that you need to make sure AI, whatever you think it's doing, it's actually doing it. You still need to test it just like you would anything else. You still need to verify it's there. Like if you set up isolation on those networks, you need to test those networks and make sure that they are in fact isolated, for instance.
Well, and remember the things about AI. AI was developed by humans. It will always be developed by humans, right? And we make mistakes. So there's, some of the mistakes that will be in AI, no matter what you do, is just coding errors. That's one place, right? The best developer, like I said, the best developing shops on the planet are usually putting out into production things that find themselves to consumers 6 to 10 errors per 1,000 lines of code. So 1,000 lines of code is sometimes called a K-lock, right? So say 6 to 10, let's average it at 8. So 8 errors per 1,000 lines of code. how many lines of code are there in AI? In the AI algorithms and engine, right? So there's going to be errors. And then it's funny because people say, well, just have AI fix the errors. Well, now you're almost compounding the problem because you have an errored AI fixing an errored, logically, there's lots of chinks in this armor, that we need to work through, not to mention bias. I have my preferred way of doing something. You have your preferred way of doing something. And so, and I have my own perspective on my preferred way of doing something. And you know what I mean? So it's like, I don't trust something else to do something for me if I like to do it this way, kind of thing. And you're not going to be able to get rid of that. You're seeing that happen more and more with LLMs and AI, where it's starting to make some really, shitty decisions. So I think for it to be something that I would trust with my network, you're probably, with critical things on my network, going through logs, stuff like that, helping me with IPS stuff, sure. But even then I would really have to know that. That's a whole nother thing, man. You could go deep with this because, like, say I buy an IPS IDS solution, intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention system, and it's got an AI backend, right? That's, because they're selling it that way, right? If you're selling any product in the information security industry today and it doesn't have some kind of AI thing in it, you're probably not going to sell it. It's a hot thing, right? Well, the thing is with AI also is it's always going to be garbage in, garbage out, right? Which is interesting because I really want to know if you're going to be building an intrusion detection system and it's going to be doing tuning based on an AI backend, I still need to know what the hell this front end does, because if they're feeding the AI garbage, you're going to get garbage back. You probably just made this product worse than had we not used AI at all. You know what I mean? So I don't know, man. There's a lot of philosophical questions that got to be answered and a lot of rules we got to figure out. We got to be responsible with what we're going to do with AI. And I just don't see enough of that happening.
Agree. So
AI. I wrote an article. Did you see that?
I have not seen it now.
It's on my blog. AI is not your friend. It's pretty cool because people are falling for that, because the prompts, the way AI, they're giving too many decisions that they should be making over to AI to make those decisions for them, and it's not working well. I think there's a lot of people that are lonely, looking for. Don't find your friend in AI. It's never going to be your friend. It's a damn computer. It's an algorithm. It's math. It doesn't know you. It doesn't care about you. It has no personality. It's not sentient. Like, be careful with AI. Just saying. That's it.
So with that, I know we're coming up towards time here. Did we want to hit a couple of test questions, practice questions?
Sure. Should we? I didn't make any. Do you guys want to make some? Do you have any practice questions? Should I ask AI?
I've already got some.
Oh, do it. Let's do it.
All right, cool. So what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and check these in chat too, so you guys can see them as well. First one, which of the following best describes the role of TCP's windowing mechanism in relation to security and performance, and how might it be exploited by an attacker? So we've got A, it ensures reliable delivery of packets by enforcing strict sequencing. B, it only allows dynamic scaling of congestion window, which can be targeted via ACK storms. C, it randomizes sequence numbers to prevent session hijacking. And D, it minimizes latency through selective retransmission. So let me know if you want the question on that again. This is not letting me put it into chat.
Oh yeah, you have to put each individual one in there.
Yeah.
Or we can share ours. Okay.
So actually, what I can do for us. I shared it in our group, if that's helpful for you.
Oh, all right. TCP's windowing mechanism. Did you have AI tell you the answers too?
I do have the answers, yes. So, and everybody
Nice.
should be able to see it now too.
Everybody can see it?
Yeah.
Everybody's saying A.
Everybody saying A,
Mm-hmm.
which the answers are down towards the bottom. So what we can do, I guess we can jump down there and see. You guys get a preview of the rest of them here. So, and yes, ladies and gentlemen, I did use AI to do these. So you guys are
Nice.
saying A. So it looks like the answer is B, according to this, because it allows dynamic scaling of the projection window, which can be targeted via axioms, and we've got an explanation on there. So I'm not gonna lie, I looked at this, I'm like, I don't know on this one. I don't remember going over anything like this when I did my studies for this. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting one.
In the TCP header, you have sequence and you have a window. The sequence is for the sequencing for that. So that would be the A answer. So yeah, B is window size. How much data is permitted in, or how much data will be sent and how much data is expected on the other side in each transmission.
Sorry for the scrolling, guys.
It's all good.
Next up, number 2. So I'll read this out for you guys, but you guys can see it here as well. You're analyzing
We
packet
talked about
capture.
this.
I notice repeated SYN packets without corresponding ACKs. What type of attack is most likely underway, and what defensive mechanism at the protocol level can mitigate it? So we're looking at IP spoofing with solved SSL pinning, DNS spoofing solved by DNSSEC, SYN flood solved by SYN cookies, or ARP poisoning solved by static ARP entries. So I have my guess on this one, or my answer on this one. Do you guys want to go first, or should I'll put myself on the hot seat. I'm going to say it's the SYN flood based off of our discussion today.
I concur, Doctor.
Awesome.
And the way
Go
SYN
ahead and
floods
jump in.
work is when you do a SYN, right? The receiver is going to send a SYN ACK back, and it's going to open essentially a timer to wait for that ACK to come back. And so what you're doing in the SYN flood attack is you're exploiting that open window, basically. So if you send like a whole bunch of SYN packets from a whole bunch of different hosts, whatever the target is going to open up all these SYN ACKs, send all these SYN ACKs back and wait for the final ACK to finish the three-way handshake. And so in older systems, you would then exhaust all the system resources, and that would be the DOS part. But new systems don't handle that. I mean, new systems don't do that anymore.
All right. Number 3. What combination of network protocols is most vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks due to lack of encryption and mutual authentication? We got SSH over TCP, DNS over UDP, IPsec in transport mode, or HTTPS with mutual TLS.
There's only one of these that has lack of encryption.
I'm gonna roll out A and D immediately because of where it's talking about encryption. I'm gonna go with B, DNS over UDP. But it could be C. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm gonna go with B.
You are correct.
You are correct indeed. All right.
So let's stay here for a second, because another thing that students should know for the test is what ports would these use? So A, SSH over TCP. What port is that?
Oh, 22?
right? Yep. And that's a common one. And what about DNS over UDP?
53.
53. Yep. And DNS uses UDP in looking for the name resolution. And then if it doesn't get a response, it'll switch over to TCP. So DNS will also use TCP 53. IPsec uses protocol numbers, not port numbers. So we don't have to worry about that. And then HTTPS.
443.
Right. So it's good to go through these and do that kind of same thing.
All right. I'm just going to go to the next one here. I'm not going to worry about the answer for that one since we covered it. What aspects of IPv6 protocol increases the susceptibility to reconnaissance attacks compared to IPv4? We got a larger header size, use of IPsec by default, built-in fragmentation, or auto configuration and multicast. Let's see. Aspect of reconnaissance.
Steve got it right.
Steve got it right.
So did Bennett. Pat didn't. Oh, Pat changed the name. Changed it. Pat got it right. Chris got it right.
So I was going to say D. I was going to immediately discount A and B. Built-in fragmentation and the auto configuration were what I was going to go with. Honestly, I was going to say auto configuration multicast just because it's the longest answer, which is not. Don't ever do that.
Right. Yeah, IP version 6 has a smaller header size, and that would make it. It has nothing to do with reconnaissance, really. IPsec by default, that actually IPsec by default, and it's not by default. It's just a protocol built into the IP version 6. Built-in fragment. The auto configuration is the crappy thing, because auto configuration means that your system in an IP version 6 network will give itself an IP or its own IP address by default. And so, you know, from a security perspective, if you're not using IP version 6, turn it off. You know, it's turned on by default, I think, on Windows systems, probably Mac systems and Linux too, for all I know, but I always turn it off.
Joshua agrees with you, Brian. He says too long to be wrong.
Honestly, there was a time in Microsoft tests where you had a fairly decent chance if you used the longest answer for it being correct. Like I said, that's not valid today. Do not use that. If you do, yeah, just don't. All right, number 5. In secure network design, what is the primary reason to segment a flat network using VLANs and layer 3 boundaries? To enforce consistent addressing schemes, to increase broadcast domain size for speed, to isolate sensitive assets and limit attack surfaces, or to facilitate spanning tree recalculation? I don't
see. This is this is what I was talking about. It's a shitty question, because a flat network using layer 3 boundaries, that's not going to isolate the system sensitive assets. It's going to segment them, but in order to truly isolate, you would have to have packet filtering involved, which means a firewall, right? Which doesn't happen at layer 3. Well, I suppose you could do packet. No, it doesn't happen at layer 3. So in this instance, the right answer, or the less wrong answer, is C, but it doesn't fit. I mean, anyway, you see what I'm saying? It's like, it's not a secure design. It's just a smart one. That's the frustration with things like this. But I guess if you know enough about, you would get this right anyway, right? Because you'd be able to enforce consistent addressing schemes. That requires on how you segmented the flat network, right? In order to do consistent, I mean, you'd have to know more than what this question's asking. To increase broadcast domain for size and speed, it does the opposite of that. So B is wrong. To facilitate spanning tree recalculation, that's a layer 2 function that happens in switches to prevent switching, I guess, loops, if you will.
Yeah, loops or storms.
Yeah. So yeah, it's C, but I don't like the question. Tell AI to get their shit straight.
I'll let them know. I'll send a in this case, a letter to Mr. GPT and see what he says.
Right,
Uh,
Mr. GPT. Send him like a snail mail. See if he gets it.
exactly. That's what I was going to do. It's going to break out, a piece of paper and a pen. It's a quill pen, really nice ink blotter. Write it
Yeah.
out. Totally. I will absolutely do that. Number 6. A firewall is allowing outbound DNS queries and blocking all other UDP traffic. How might an attacker still exfiltrate data over this connection, and what security measure would be best suited to detect or block it? So we have a covert channel and ICMP to detect with packet capture, DNS tunneling detect with deep packet inspection, SSL hijacking to prevent HSTS, and TCP SYN flood mitigate the rate limiting or mitigate with rate limiting. So I'll say that I'll take this one on and say, like, judging by just the answer being in the question, I would go with B on this one for DNS tunneling, to use that to exfiltrate data and get deep packet inspection to see what's in there. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, that's the right one. That's the right question. Because well, number one, that's the only one that's actually, if you're allowing outbound UDP queries, then it's the UDP 53, right? ICMP is it's a layer 3 protocol. It's really not. It has nothing to do with this, really. SSL hijacking to prevent HSTS. Well, that would be 443. It's not a DNS query. TNS or TCP SYN flood. Again, it is DNS tunneling, and the way DNS tunneling is when you look at the packet, like it's that encapsulation piece, that data piece, and then you put the addressing and all that stuff on it. So the header, everything looks like it's a DNS packet, except for that data has been, in a typical DNS packet, the data would be essentially just the query, but you instead put the data that you're exfiltrating. So yeah, it's B. It's B. B for
All right.
butter. Butter on your corn.
Number 7. Which of the
I'm
following
tired.
no problem, man. We've got three more after this one. We're almost done.
Oh, yeah,
Which of the following best explains the risk of asymmetric routing in a stateful firewall deployment? Firewalls may fail to perform NAT correctly. Return packets may bypass firewall inspection, breaking session tracking. It causes an increase of CRC errors on Ethernet frames, and asymmetric pass disable VLAN tagging consistency. And stateful. This is, I'm not sure on this one. Got a couple B's in chat. Any thoughts on this one? I'll throw this over to you guys because I'll be honest and say I'm not going to get this one.
Well, let me, it's either A or B, but I'm trying to think through this really quick because it has nothing to do with CRC or Ethernet frames, or asymmetric paths, and they won't disable VLAN tagging consistency, but the firewall failing to perform NAT correctly. So the way NAT works is, let's assume it's port address translation. So in that table, in the stateful firewall table, you've got the socket stuff, right? Source port, source test, and then it's mapped to the externally routable IP address, right? So then when it receives the data back, it needs to know where to put it back. And so in an asymmetric route, would it change then? No, because the address was still the same. It would just be the route to get to it. Man, this is a good one. I'd say B, just because I think NAT would still work fine. I don't think that would break.
Gotcha. Let's check.
Let's go see. Yeah.
So 7. Answer B. Return packets may. So asymmetric routing causes return traffic to bypass original inspection path. Stateful firewall will drop such traffic because it does not recognize the session state.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had to reason my way through that because I guess I never really thought of it, but that was a good question. I like that one.
Cool.
But I got it right still. Hey, right? Yeah.
Nice job. Sometimes you just have to sit there and dissect it. And
Yeah. So I had to think it through like, okay, what the hell would actually happen? But that's another good thing about knowing how things actually work, right? Because then you can logic your way through it. And like, even though I've never seen it, I guess hypothetically it could happen kind of thing.
Indeed. All right. Number 8, now that you guys have already seen the answer for it, how does the
Oh,
OSI
did you already
model?
show it?
Yeah, you could see it when I had scrolled down to the answer for 7. How does the OSI model session layer differ from the transport layer in terms of security responsibility and what protocols exemplify this? So
Hey, before we
session
get
layer.
into that, session layer is what layer?
Well, I gotta think this through.
That's kind of fun.
3? No, 3, right?
Yeah.
5.
Shit.
I was gonna say,
Well, I mean, 3 if you're coming down, right? 1, 2,
Yeah.
3,
I
but
did.
5 if you're going up. Yep. And then transport layer,
that
right below it, man, right there, 4.
T4.
Yep. Application, presentation, session, transport, network, data link, physical.
See, I was trying to do. You probably couldn't see my hand, but I was trying to.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, and the cool thing is, I mean, that's the thing. Like, there's nothing wrong with any of us not getting that right. We've already passed the test. I'm guessing that if you were a network person and so you learn what you need to learn to pass the test, and then you go find a job doing what you do, right? And what you do might not be anything to do with networking. So why the hell would you still remember what layer of, you know what I mean? So, because you get a lot of people that, like, if you ask me a lot of the questions when we get to like the last 2 sessions of this cohort, there's going to be a lot of questions that I'm going to get wrong because I just don't do that. I did when I passed the test. So it's interesting. That's cool. All right. Anyway, the question is what?
how does the OSI model's session layer differ from the transport layer in terms of security responsibility and what protocols exemplify this? So session layer is stateless. Transport layer manages authentication. Session layer manages key exchange. Example, NetBIOS. Transport ensures reliable delivery. Example, TCP. Session layer handles addressing. Transport layer handles MAC filtering. Session layer operates at hardware level. Transport layer is purely logical.
You can cross off C and D right out of the gate, right? Because session layer handles addressing, transport layer handles MAC filtering. MAC filtering happens at layer 2, between layer 2 and layer 3, maybe. So that would be the data link layer. So that's definitely not the right one. Session layer operates at the hardware level. Hardware level is the physical layer. So that's definitely wrong. So you're left with A and B, because if you don't remember what happens at these layers, at least now, because you're going to do this on the test, it's almost, I've consistently heard it from everybody who's taken the test that there's always 2 answers you can almost cross off right away if you know anything about what it's asking. So then it leaves you with A or B, right? Session layer is stateless, transport layer manages authentication. Turns out that that's, if you know, that's just not true. So the right answer is B, but that's the kind of logic that you can go through when you're taking the exam, right? You know that C or D are definitely not going to be the answer. So then it's like, oh crap, I can't remember if A or B is right. Well, at least you've given yourself a 50-50 chance where you had a 25% chance out of the gate. But if you know the answer, then great. That's even better. It's B.
So, and I do want to stress that this is extremely testable, the OSI model. Make sure that you guys know this. Like to the point of even where like Evan had asked, what layer is this? Where you guys can go think it through, use the mnemonics on it and be like, okay, it's this one. Make sure that you know this. Like I said, very, very, very testable.
Yeah. And if you are going to be a network person, you'll fall in love with the OSI model. I mean, it's like, it's awesome.
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier when you're working with this information on a regular basis. And also, if this is something that if you do for some reason need to do this or look into this after you guys pass the exam, you have a lot of resources that you can access that will have this information. Same thing, I didn't mention earlier, but subnet calculators are a thing where you can plug in information into a calculator and it'll help you calculate what you need to do. All right. Number 9, which technique is most effective in detecting lateral movement in a segmented enterprise network? So deploying endpoint protection software, using SNMP traps on routers, analyzing east-west traffic with network behavior analytics, or implementing VPN access logs.
I think C makes the best, makes the most sense out of the available choices.
Yep, I agree. So immediately
concur.
D goes off. Your VPN is not gonna to be in this area. C also, you're not gonna worry about those routers for east or for lateral movement generally since they're in the network. So you got B and C, and I agree, east-west traffic. Really, that's what's used as lateral generally in networks. So that would be my key there for C.
Yeah. In that case, so north would be egress, south is ingress, east, west, lateral. Yep.
All right. Number 10. How does a reverse proxy contribute to application layer security in comparison to a traditional forward proxy? It encrypts all internal traffic. It authenticates internal users and external systems. It acts on behalf of the server, masking its identity and applying application layer filtering, or it monitors client behavior to block SQL injection. So a reverse proxy.
It's like it's proxying, but it's reverse. Like, why do I want to go backwards? Doesn't make any sense. I want a forward proxy. I want to go forward. We got to make progress here.
Don't we all?
Yes. Yes, we do.
All right.
So you just say this one, you just need to know what a proxy does.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's C.
Yeah, see. Cool.
C. All right, that's 10. And it's 6:57 my time.
Yes, it is.
It's a
Okay,
good discussion. I like talking about networks. We can talk about networks more anytime you want to.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I wanna see your more in-depth discussion on networks someday. To supplement this one, if you ever get a chance for it or do it, I will totally watch/listen to that.
Well, I think what because this is the first year that we are doing this way, right? And I think next year what we'll do is we'll take that 4.5 hour thing, right, and break it down into these digestible chunks, and then I think have some practical exercises that go along with it.
That would be cool.
So, like, if you want to see this in real life, do these things, right? Then you'll be able to see them. It'll be, there are other courses like that, and then maybe we'll create like a more advanced, like, okay, now that I know this, like you say DNS spoofing, do it. And, that's the part where people are like, oh, wow, but yeah, I think we'll do that in the next year. We'll make it more like, and I say hack your, maybe we'll hack my own network while we're here,
That'd be cool. I'd allow it.
Yeah, we could piss off my daughter. That's always fun.
With that, I'm going to say thank you guys for joining us. As always, we're in Discord if you guys want to chat. DMs are open. Send us a message in there or just hit us up on one of the channels. Other than that, thank you guys and have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Awesome.
Bye,
Good
everyone.
job, man. Stream has been ended.
Awesome. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
my pleasure,
Discussion.
man.